Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. I am Diane Pickles, and on behalf of the National MPS Society, I would like to welcome you to a webinar on tried and true and new media advocacy tools. We're going to talk tonight about some free media tools to advance MPS advocacy issues. So as I said, my name is Diane Pickles, and I'm just going to do a quick introduction of myself and my organization, which is M&R Strategic Services. We are a national advocacy firm. We're based in Washington, D.C. I have had the distinct pleasure and honor of working for the National MPS Society for the last several years, assisting with its grassroots advocacy work, mostly focused on federal advocacy goals. So working to increase funding for research for MPS and related diseases, and also working to advance legislation that would accelerate new treatments and advances and work towards one day hopefully finding a cure. We at M&R are kind of a full service advocacy firm. We work with clients on all different aspects of advocacy, from media, communications, grassroots, coalition building. We do research, we do lobbying, we kind of do soup to nuts, all different kinds of advocacy. But as I said, my work with the society has really focused on grassroots. So tonight, what we really want to focus on, though, is media advocacy, which is one specific component of advocacy. But I always start with a definition of advocacy just to get us sort of all on the same page. Advocacy really very simply is the application of pressure and influence on the people and institutions that have the power to give you what you want. And when you think about this beautiful, adorable little boy who wants a puppy, he understands that there is a decision maker or two in his home. Mom or dad or both are the decision makers in his home, and he knows how to apply pressure and influence to get them to hopefully give him a puppy. And I've been in that position as the parent with a child who wants a puppy, and I know full well that they know how to push our buttons. They know how to appeal to us based on what's unique about us. They understand that mom and dad are different, and what makes mom cave is different than what makes dad cave frequently. And that's the key. The key to advocacy is really just understanding what it is about that decision maker and what they care about and what motivates them, and then applying pressure around those very things. And we're born advocates. We understand advocacy from the time we're born. Young children do it really, really well. And really, when we talk about advocacy for policy change, we're really talking about that same set of skills, but we're just applying it on a bigger scale to get lawmakers, decision makers, to change policy. And that's really what we're talking about. So when we say advocacy, all we mean is applying pressure and influence on those decision makers to give us what we want. And in this case, what we're generally talking about is passing policies, as I said, to advance cures or treatments, and one day hopefully a cure for MPS and related diseases. And how we do that is a lot of different tools and tactics. Media advocacy is one tool in our toolbox when it comes to advocacy, and that's the one we're going to focus on tonight. But what do I mean when I say media advocacy? Media advocacy is the strategic use of mass media. Mass media is newspaper, radio, television, blogs in today's world, and social media, all of those big media forums. And it's the strategic use of those mass media outlets to advance our policy initiatives, our policy goals. But even more specifically, media advocacy is about getting our issue to be debated in those media outlets that matter to our key decision makers. So if we know, for example, that our decision makers are listening to a specific radio station frequently, or reading a particular newspaper in our community or in our state or in our district, those are the places where we most want to get our issue to be debated and talked about, because those are the outlets that our decision makers are paying attention to. And that's really what we mean by media advocacy. That's really all it's about. It's not necessarily about getting our name in the paper, our organization's name in the paper. It's really about getting our issue to be talked about in those outlets. And there are a lot of different ways we do this. Sometimes we utilize paid media, but what we're talking about tonight are two of the free, and it's in air quotes there, free, and very powerful tools. The reason it's in quotations as in the free part is because there are sometimes, it certainly takes people time. It takes our time, and therefore there's a resource charge cost to it. But also when it comes to social media, there are certainly costs associated with social media that people can make investments in social media, organizations can make investments in social media to boost and promote their posts. We're not going to talk about that tonight because that's more things that an organization would choose to do, but to make their social media even more impactful to reach more people. So it's not always free, but for individuals like yourselves who want to advocate for issues you care about, you have access to these tools and they're free. And they are incredibly powerful. And I call Letters to the Editor as a tried and true tool because it's been around for a long time. It's been around since the beginning of time with newspapers. I feel it's incredibly underutilized and it's very powerful. And I refer to social media as new, again, being in air quotes, because it's really not all that new. But using it for advocacy is still a relatively new phenomenon and something we're still learning how to do well. And in my work with individuals who are advocating, it's not something that I see a lot of folks do frequently or do all that well. So tried and true and new is what we're going to talk about tonight. But let's talk about the tried and true. Let's start with talking about letters to the editor. As I said, I think this is an incredibly underutilized tool and a very powerful one. So let's talk about why they're powerful. Why do they matter? There's a couple different reasons. First and foremost, lawmakers care about the issues that are being talked about in their district. And if a letter to the editor appears in their local paper, that is an issue that's being talked about in their district. That's one of the ways they gauge that. And their staff, as it says, definitely read their local opinion pages. That is how they gauge what the community cares about. But another reason, and even kind of elevated a little bit more importantly, is that if there's a letter to the editor that actually mentions a lawmaker's name, that letter will get picked up in what we call the morning clips by a lawmaker's office. And so what that means is that on a lawmaker's staff person's desk in the morning, they will see that letter because it will have been kind of flagged in their news searches because their boss's name has been mentioned. And so it will really be right on their desk first thing in the morning. So if letters mention a lawmaker by name, they can be really powerful because of that, even more, a little more powerful than letters always are. And all letters to the editor are powerful, but they can be more powerful. Another reason that letters to the editor are very powerful is because the editors of newspapers are reading all the letters that get submitted and that are published. And that can influence the editorials that the newspapers write and publish. And editorials are very powerful because that's really a position that the newspaper is taking. So it's an opinion of the newspaper, and those have a lot of impact on lawmakers and the decisions that they make, because that's really, kind of a broad statement of how the community, if you will, feels about a particular issue. So those are very influential. And so our letters to the editor can have an impact on that. And last, but by no means least, our letters to the editor, getting our issue submitted or published as a letter to the editor, elevates our issue and makes it news. So it takes our issue and really gets it into the newspaper, albeit on the opinion page, it still makes it a news item. And that's very, very powerful. So letters to the editor are incredibly powerful. But there are some ways to do it well. We can submit 100 letters to the editor, and if we're not doing it well, we might not get any of them published. And so we want to make sure that we're doing it well so that we have a good chance of getting our letters published. One of the most important tips that I can provide is to connect your letter to current events and/or recent articles. If you can specifically mention an article that's run recently, all the better. And so to really say, as mentioned or as described in the article that ran on this date, that is going to give you a much better chance of having your letter get published. And that means you need to be a frequent reader of that newspaper in order to know what has run in the paper so you can mention that. But the number one tip, you will not get your letter published if you don't follow the rules that are laid out by the specific outlet. And that means in terms of submission and word count. So the process to submit a letter to the editor, you will find that on their website, on the opinion. It'll describe how to submit opinion pieces. It will be either through an online portal or through email. And you absolutely have to follow their instructions. And when they say 200 word max, they truly mean 200 word max. You absolutely cannot exceed their word limit. Stick to one main point. If you feel like you're wandering into a second, point that you want to mention in the letter, you need a second letter. It's got to be really, really succinct. And you'll find to stick within the word limits, you have to stick to one point anyway. Never send attachments if you are submitting your letter by email. Never send it as a Word document attachment. Members of the media, reporters will never open an attachment. It's just a rule in the world of media. They do not open attachments. So paste it directly into the body of your email. Always include your contact information. They will absolutely call to confirm your submission, and you must be prepared for that and respond to that. So include your contact information, including your daytime phone number. And then when they call you, you just say, yes, I submitted it and it's okay to run it. Make a personal connection to the issue. If you can personalize something in the letter, share your personal story in some short, succinct way, that will give it a greater likelihood of being published as well. As we talked about, if you can mention your lawmaker by name, it elevates the chance of getting it published. So look for natural opportunities to mention your lawmaker. If you've had a recent conversation or meeting with your lawmaker, mention that. Thanks so much to Senator so-and-so for taking time to meet with me and talk about MPS or rare diseases. It needs to be authentic. It can't be forced or fake. But where you can find those opportunities, that can be powerful. Focus on small as well as large outlets. Here I live in Massachusetts, and the big newspapers here are the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. But we've got some big daily regional papers. But even the small, local papers like the Wilmington Bumblebee, are important because the lawmakers from those local communities and those districts are reading those local papers. So don't discount your small outlets, and you'll have a much easier time getting your letter published in the smaller outlets than in the large outlets. I should also say, it doesn't say it here, but I should also mention, don't take the same letter and send it out to all your local newspapers. Many outlets are proprietary and do not like that. So generally, we recommend sending your letter to one outlet and not sending it to another unless the first outlet doesn't publish it. If your letter gets printed, follow up. Send it to your lawmaker with a short little note by email, and just sort of say, just wanted to make sure you saw this. Don't send snail mail. Here's another tip. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill these days generally don't receive mail. It takes forever because it has to go through a lot of screening in the age that we are living in, with mail being suspect. So just send it in an email. And just know that if your newspaper has those online comments, be cautious about reading them. I don't think a lot of your issues would open you up to getting a lot of negative comments, but it can happen. If you do, you have to have some thick skin around it and not take it personally. Some people just like to be negative and nasty, especially if they're anonymous comments, and just don't respond, because the back and forth is just never helpful in advancing our causes. So that's a quick overview of letters to the editor. Let's dig into social media. It has been a lot of changes in 10 years in social media, from Facebook launching and Twitter launching. That's a picture of the very first tweet in 2006 by the guy who founded Twitter. And now we've got Instagram, and advocates are really using all three. The demographics are different for all three of those platforms. I know this is hard to see and you don't need to see it close up, but the difference, what I really most wanted to show you here, is that there's a difference of percentages of men versus women on each of these platforms. You can see that Twitter is probably the most well balanced in terms of men and women, equal percentages of men and women, and also the age breakdown of who's on Twitter, although as you go up in age for all of these, you will find smaller percentages when you get into like the 65 plus population. Instagram by far has the youngest population on it. So depending on who you're looking to reach, you'll want to think about the medium in terms of advocacy. But for decision makers and reporters, here's what's interesting. Reporters and decision makers are all on Twitter in today's world. Decision makers, lawmakers are all on Facebook. But you can talk directly at them on Twitter, which is one of the advantages of Twitter. So you can tweet directly at a member of Congress or a reporter. And it's a great way to sort of engage in a dialogue with them. You can't do that with a lawmaker on Facebook. They don't allow, most of them, for you to post a comment on their page or on their wall the way you can do with your friends. So you can view what they post, but you're not going to generally be able to comment to them directly. But Twitter is a very interactive platform and a really interesting one in that way. So an interesting one to pay attention to. But my advice generally is to not look to be on new platforms. Pick the one where you are and work to utilize it for advocacy rather than try to get yourself on a new platform and learn a new platform. I also just want to mention we now have Snapchat, and there are some organizations and individuals who are starting to use this for advocacy, for marches and things like that. And some members of Congress are on Snapchat, which seems a little odd to me, but there are some that are on it. I don't think it's a place where most advocates are having a lot of impact or effect. So it's not one that I really recommend to people to utilize for advocacy. Here are some big picture do's and don'ts when it comes to social media. As I said a minute ago, pick a channel or a place, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, where you are already spending time, where you feel most comfortable, and focus there. Don't try to be on all three. You'll go crazy. My recommendation is generally Facebook or Twitter. I don't see people having a whole lot of impact on Instagram unless you're looking to reach a young audience, which for your issues, that's not really relevant. Unless you're looking to recruit, MPS patients or younger families or something like that, and then that might be very relevant. But if you're looking to impact members of Congress, then that's not where you want to be. But pick a channel where you're comfortable and focus your efforts there. Definitely try to make your social media content personal, visual, and conversational. As much as we can make this about a dialogue with folks, the better. And sharing our stories and visual content is essential in today's social media world. It is all visual. Twitter did not used to be that way, didn't start that way. It's all visual now. Using shared hashtags is really, really effective. Look at the hashtags that the National MPS Society is using and share those, use those. That way they can be searched to find shared content. And it's also, things that folks can share and use the same hashtags and get them to, trend, if you will. And so that's important. So, for example, hashtag cure MPS. But using hashtags is a great way to sort of get people to repeat the hashtags that you've used. Boost, what I call boosting society action alerts. And I apologize, I should have capitalized society. I meant the National MPS Society. Boosting the society's action alerts and events and fundraisers. So the content that the National MPS Society is posting, as well as other rare disease organizations that you support, boost that content by sharing it, by liking it, by retweeting it. That's a great way to help their advocacy efforts and also build your own audience following and get your own feet wet as an advocate. And so you don't need to just create your own content all the time, but to be boosting the advocacy messages of others is a great way to go about doing this. And then I mentioned before, following and talking directly to lawmakers and reporters. So follow them, like them, and follow them, become part of their audience, and talk to them, really tweet at them. This is more a Twitter tip, but if you're on Twitter, talk to them. If a reporter covers an issue related to rare diseases, and you think they did a good job on it, tweet at them and say, hey, loved your article on X, Y, or Z. They notice that. And they might just talk back to you and say, and let them know, I have a child with MPS, a rare disease, an ultra rare disease. If you're ever looking for someone to talk to about a story, let me know. They might just contact you. They're always looking for sources for stories, and it's a great way to build a relationship with reporters. They're very responsive on Twitter. Decision makers are also very responsive on Twitter, lawmakers. It's their staff, but they're really paying attention there in that forum. And definitely follow your lawmakers on Facebook, because what they're posting about is definitely important to them, and it's important to know what they're paying attention to and what they care about. It's also a great way to find out about events of places that they will be in the district. So let's talk a little bit about best practices on Facebook and Twitter. On Facebook, the golden rule is to post less often than how often you would post on Twitter. Or folks will your audience, your friends rather, will absolutely hide or block you. You cannot post too often. The other golden rule, if you want to be successful for advocacy, is to create share-worthy content. And what I mean by share-worthy content is content that others will like and share. And the reason that is so essential is because that gets your content in front of other people. It makes it far more likely that your content will be seen, not just by your friends, but by new audiences. And the way that the Facebook algorithms work, there's only a very small percentage of our own friends that actually see our posts. And so our goal should be to create something that gets shared, and then new people see our posts as well. And share-worthy content, the way to do that is, making it personal with personal stories, sharing important facts or data, inspirational quotes. People love the beautiful photos with quotes. Visuals, really, really important. And breaking news, I think, is a great way to get people to pay attention and to then like and share your content on Facebook. On Twitter, it's the exact opposite of Facebook, right? Sharing content, posting as often as you want is never a bad thing. There's no such thing really as too often. There are people who tweet 2 to 3 times a day, and as long as it's relevant, nobody's going to block or no one's going to unfollow you. Sharing content of others on Twitter is absolutely essential to build your list. There's sort of this, it's not as much as it used to be, but it's still true. If you follow someone on Twitter, it's very common for them to follow you back. And so it really helps you build your own list, which means that what you put out on Twitter, those people you're following are more likely to see. So if you want to be a successful poster, meaning a tweeter, someone who's on Twitter, you have to be a frequent consumer. I think you have to be on Twitter, with some frequency, and you'll see a lot of good content that you can then retweet. So you don't need to be creating all your own content. Making it visual is really important. Twitter did not start out as a visual platform, and it has become a visual platform. And so using visual content is really, really important. To make it be seen and appreciated, meaning, liked and retweeted. Using hashtags is really important. People look for those hashtags, but don't make it such a long hashtag that people can't read what you wrote. And we've talked about engaging in conversation with reporters and other advocates and decision makers. There really is that ability to be conversational. And there are new rules now on Twitter that you can extend the 140 characters, but I do not recommend it. I think it's still, less is still more in my mind. From what we're seeing, people get turned off when it's too long a tweet. I think occasionally is fine, but I would not make it a rule. So here's my most important takeaways for you. Some of the most important tools in your advocacy toolbox are free, and that's a great part of the message here. So I would say take them home, think about them, and test some things out, and see what you're comfortable with it. Give it a shot. I would say the first time you submit a letter to the editor of your local paper and it gets published, it feels a little weird. I remember being on like a little league field and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I saw your letter to the editor," and it felt a little strange, but also a bit empowering. People read them. People really read them. So test some things out. This is free and really powerful tools. Your personal stories are your most powerful content. So really leveraging that and utilizing that will increase your chances of getting in front of people, getting it noticed, and in the case of letters, getting them published, and in the case of social media, getting it shared. You have to be an active consumer of the media where you want to be effective as an advocate. And so, you're just not going to be able to occasionally, submit a letter to the editor of a paper. You get lucky occasionally, but to be most effective, you really have to be kind of reading the outlets and know what's being covered and what's current events in those papers, et cetera, to be most effective. Remember, media advocacy is about getting our issues to be debated in the outlets that matter to our decision makers. So if you're sparking some controversy, that's a job well done. Good job. And also, if you don't know what outlets matter to your decision makers, if you're meeting with your member of Congress, ask them, what papers do you read? What radio stations do you listen to if you're interested in knowing down the road what radio stations they care about? But you can always ask what newspapers they read. But I think it's fair to assume it's, everything from the most local papers. I think they read all the newspapers. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. But remember, if you're sparking controversy, you're doing a good job as an advocate. And lastly, remember that advocacy is a skill. It keeps getting better with practice, and we improve over time. So don't be shy about, really experimenting and seeing what works and seeing where you get better. And don't feel you need to, with social media, make up all your own content. You really, truly don't need to do that. So with that, I'm going to close us out and let you know about next steps. So the next steps are that you will receive a link to the recording, the slides, and 2 tools. One will be kind of a summary of the tips and best practices on letters to the editor, and the other will be tips and best practices for social media. And we will get those will come to you from the Society. And we hope that those are helpful. And on behalf of everyone at the National MPS Society, I thank you for your time and your attention and for logging on tonight. And we hope that you will put some of these new tools to use. And we wish you a wonderful rest of the evening. Thanks so much. Take care.